Chapter 22. A Time for Writing. The role of a writer is not to say what we all can say, but what we are unable to say. Anais Nin. It had already been an excellent day for trading. David felt on top of the world. He and Jess had made it official with the kids, and even shared the news of their relationship with a trusted few, Thurman Banks, who had dropped by unexpectedly and caught them holding hands, and Sarah Turner, who had smiled and nodded her approval. It was a moment in time when everything seemed bright. Anything was possible, and there were no clouds or harsh words that could mar their happiness. Jess had reminded him that there was a trader leaving town soon, and asked if David could find her some paper. "I'm running low. I'm finishing up with Sarah Turner, and then I'm hoping to speak to Mr. Stevens and write down his story." Jess had been writing down the various townspeople's stories for a while now, and filled several notebooks. There was a large stack of them in one corner of her room, filled with personal stories, accounts of the invasion of Belton, descriptions of lives before and after the war, and so much more. Jess had earned quite a reputation around town, and residents now sought her out and volunteered their stories. She had heard heartbreak and tragedy, but also she had listened to the young and the old alike as they smiled and relayed tales of falling in love, of babies born, and accounts of a world that was harsh, simple, and in some ways more real than the old one. Through the people and their stories twined hope and love like threads of shining gold. She had filled countless notebooks with delicate script and was close to running out of the last battered one in the stack. "Whatever you can find would be wonderful." David caught the trader just in time. He had been packing up, having stayed in a small room in a decrepit building across from Sarah Turner's cafe for 2 full days. When David had asked for paper, he had rustled around in the back of a still overly full van filled with boxes, overflowing with a wild medley of tools, fabric, shoes, and more. A moment later, he had handed over 2 simple student notebooks with lined paper. "I think I have something more here," he had said, and began digging further into the stacks of items. David marveled at the man's ability to find anything. It looked, for all accounts, like a hodgepodge with no rhyme or reason, but the trader always seemed to know exactly where to look. He pulled out a large tote, shifted another to the left, and began pawing through a third one. "Oh, yes, here it is." The trader handed David a journal encased in a soft leather case. It had obviously been handmade, was soft and supple. The pages within were thick and sturdy. It was thick as well, the paper roughly cut and of different shades of cream and pale yellow. The thick leather smelled vaguely of lemon. "I got a whole crate full back in Tennessee a few months ago. This kid Joseph Perdue lives in this hole-in-the-wall town, makes Belton look positively metropolitan, and he makes them all by hand. Traded them for auto parts." David felt the well-cured leather and noticed a small raised area on the back. The initials J.P. were embossed on the back. "He does quality work," the trader added, anxious for a sale. Neither of them had noticed Sarah Turner's face when the name Perdue and Tiptonville had been mentioned. She had turned pale and excused herself without a word. As she slipped away, Sarah couldn't help but wonder who Joseph was. Possibly a grandchild of old Fenton Perdue? She recalled that he had a son who had moved away to New York. In a small town like Tiptonville, everyone knew everyone else. It had been years since she had been there, more than half a lifetime since she had run away in the night with her 2 small children and left Wes Perkins behind. For the first time in 20 years, Tiptonville suddenly felt close enough to touch. She wasn't that frightened young woman any longer. She disappeared into the cafe and lost herself in making preparations for the lunch crowd. Neither the trader nor David had noticed her departure. David looked at the well-made, hand-crafted journal in his hand and nodded. They began hashing out a trade. The trader was itching to return home after a month on the road. He'd accepted 5 dozen eggs and 3 jars of preserves, along with a bag of deer jerky, in trade for the journal and the 2 notebooks. It was a good trade, and they had plenty of extra eggs these days, with the expanded chicken house and yard and an overabundance of fruit to can and to preserves. The trader had also given him 3 clean and empty jars in return. David brought it back to Jess that night, after visiting with Sarah Turner, who seemed quite distracted and quiet, not her usual ebullient self. He had also run a handful of errands for old Mr. Banks, who had been having trouble getting around lately due to swelling in his knees. The old man was having more and more difficulty getting around, and Jess, David, and Jacob visited him often to help in whatever way they could. As he handed over first the notebooks and then the journal, David hadn't thought much of it. Jess had asked for something to write in, and he had dutifully found it. It was paper and leather, nothing special in David's eyes, but the reaction Jess had to it made his heart stutter. Even now, 3 months into their new relationship, a simple touch or look in her eyes brought on such overwhelming feelings of wonder and desire. Knowing that she returned his feelings was staggering, new, and each day he wondered when he would wake up from this beautiful dream he was having. Her fingers stroked the leather cover, and then opened the book to fan the pages within. She smiled, unconsciously, her eyes soaking up the thick, rich paper, and like David, her fingers found the embossed initials. "J.P.?" she asked, her eyes flashing up to him. "Trader said it was some kid in Tennessee who made them all by hand. Joseph Purdue, I think." "David, it's beautiful." Her crayon blue eyes smiled up at him. "Thank you." She couldn't imagine what she would write in this thing of beauty, but she knew it would have to be something special, something different. David had been surprised at the force in which she hugged him. Later that night, after they had made love, she had slipped out of bed. "I'm going to stay up a while," she had said, kissing him. She had selected the leather journal, slipped quietly down the hall, and sat down at the kitchen table. The night was quite warm, now that it was early June, and the cicadas were thrumming noisily outside. In the far distance, you could occasionally hear the low of a cow. The horse and goats inside the garage-turned-barn were silent, and the stars glinted in the clear night sky. Jess sat at the kitchen table, a small candle glimmering and expanding on the moonlight that spilled in through the window. She stared at the journal, touched the soft leather with her fingers, and wondered what to do with it. Several minutes went by before she slowly opened the journal and began to write. "There are moments when all of it is too much, too painful to remember. Yet then I look around at those I love and realize I would not be here with these people who I love and who love me if those awful things had not happened to me. How do you reconcile that?"